Wow.
David, your name was dropped in some documents. Tell us about that.
So my name appeared on page 2 of the sentencing memo that was prepared by Special Counsel Robert Mueller, describing how on January 12 of 2017, I wrote that Mike Flynn, then heading to the White House, had had a call not disclosed with the Russian ambassador, Sergei Kislyak, on December 29. And I raised the question of whether in that call, which is the same day that President Obama announced sanctions on Russia for its meddling in our elections, Flynn had discussed with Kislyak the possibility that the new administration would drop those sanctions. And that began a process, as the sentencing memo says, that led finally to Flynn's interview with the FBI, his lies to the FBI, his departure from the administration, and all that we've seen. So it's interesting. It feels like, a little moment of history to have been at the start.
You know, Mika, for those that really don't remember so well about the campaign and Flynn's role in it, Michael Flynn, as we were told all along, was the person that went with Donald Trump everywhere in the campaign, was around him all the time. Staff members complained that he was at meetings he wasn't supposed to be in. And what we heard from staff members was that they would fly Michael Flynn all over the country with Donald Trump because he would calm him down, made him feel a bit more substantial with a general around him, and also would stop him from, quote, saying crazy things.
Right. Well, actually, with staff members and family members, who we would ask, what's he doing there? And they would say he calms him down. He sits with him on the plane. He travels with him. And that carried on into the White House.
Was with him
when
everywhere.
We went to the White House several times. He was literally everywhere, in the doorway, holding papers, kind of lurking almost, but always there. Even like during a lunch, he would just meander into the room.
So a constant presence there. You have Cohen, also a constant presence around Donald Trump as well. And Donald Trump can try to, and the administration and all of his sad apologists across the media can try to minimize these two roles, the two roles these people played. But man, very significant.
So let's get into the new court filings from the special counsel about former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. In the heavily redacted memo, Mueller's team says Flynn has provided substantial assistance with several ongoing investigations and is recommending that he receive little or no prison time. That part is staggering, in my opinion. According to the memo, Flynn has provided firsthand information about the content and context of interactions between the Trump transition team and Russian government officials. The document notes that Flynn has met with the special counsel's team 19 times and has provided them with documents and communications. The memo says Flynn began providing information to investigators not long after the government first sought his cooperation. It reads, quote, his early cooperation was particularly valuable because he was one of the few people with long-term and first-hand insight regarding events and issues under investigation by the special counsel's office. According to the memo, Flynn's cooperation also extends to a criminal investigation that is separate from Mueller's probe. But the next 22 lines in the document have been completely redacted.
Long-term relationship with Donald Trump and intimate to so many of the dealings. It makes him an extraordinarily important witness, and one that we also hear from the filings, read in the filings, also got other people testifying before the independent counsel's office.
Yeah, we learned that General Flynn spoke to the special counsel's office 19 times. He's spoken to them 19 times as part of this deal. And Joyce Fancy put that together with what's been reported as 70 hours of meeting between Michael Cohen and the special counsel's office. You can add, obviously, Paul Manafort into there, although his deal is now scrapped. Obviously, Bob Mueller got what he needed out of him. Separately, Alan Weisselberg, the CFO of the Trump Organization, he had an immunity deal in the Michael Cohen affair. In other words, the people closest to President Trump during the campaign and also some during his presidency and going back 30 years in the case of Weisselberg have spoken to prosecutors, have spoken to people who are trying to get to the bottom of whether or not there was collusion and obstruction in this case.
You know, Mueller's team has quietly and very efficiently put together, it looks like, a complete cast of all of the people that they needed to talk to get to the bottom of this. And although a lot of people were very disappointed by how heavily redacted this memo was last night, I think as you read through it, maybe the second or the third read, you realize how much detail it provides. Of course, it provides information that Flynn is cooperating not just with the special counsel, but in an additional criminal investigation that's not identified, and also in a third investigation that's completely redacted. We simply don't know, is that counterintelligence? Is it something just that we don't know about at this point in time? So there has been from Flynn that just enormous breadth of cooperation. But also there's this notion that he was the Trump whisperer to whom Trump probably confided, spoke extensively, and now Bob Mueller has all of that information.
And what do you read, Joyce, into the fact that the recommendation from the special counsel's office is no or limited prison time because of Flynn's, quote, substantial assistance? What does that tell you about what Mueller got from General Flynn?
Flynn didn't just give Mueller something valuable. He gave him multiple somethings that were valuable. Substantial assistance is a term of art for prosecutors. It means a witness who can help you make additional cases or cases on additional people. So that has to be the baseline for what Flynn had to contribute here. I think it speaks to the deal that he got. It's not just that these charges that he pled guilty to were charges that only gave him a guideline range of 0 to 6 months. 6 months was the most he could have received, and Mueller's suggesting that he received no time. Flynn could have been subjected to additional charges that would have considerably raised that calculus. The fact that he remained pleading guilty only to these charges of 1001, lying to the government, tells me that he really brought something valuable to the table.
Joyce, last week you said that you believed Mueller was holding a royal flush. Why is that?
Well, when you read the Cohen papers that came forward last week, something really stuck out, and that was the fact that they spoke for the first time about the president's children. When they were talking about the lies that Cohen made when he testified up on the Hill, there were a couple of different categories of lies. And for those to be important to prosecutors, they have to be material. That means that they have to be critical to what you're looking at charging. And there was this conversation not only about the Trump-Moscow deal going on much later into the campaign that had been previously disclosed, but also that the president's children were being briefed. Prosecutors don't like to drag people's name through the mud unnecessarily. I know that comes as a surprise to everybody, but it's just a practice that you don't involve people that you're not going to charge. I thought that that really stood out, and combined with all of the detail from Cohen and the other detail that we knew was available from other witnesses, for instance, Rick Gates, who's certainly a stand-in for Manafort, it looked to me like Mueller really is sort of closing the pincers and ready to bring this to a close in a very comprehensive way.
Mike, as a reporter through the years, you've looked at several of these documents before, redacted, not redacted. What was your takeaway?
My takeaway was that Bob Mueller and his people have a substantial case going here. And this particular, the Flynn sentencing memo, David, it was filled with language that just jumps out, as Joyce just mentioned, the word substantial. But the paragraph, the sentence, the defendant's decision to plead likely affected the decision of related first-hand witnesses to be forthcoming. And when you think about the timeline involved, January 24th, this is when this begins, 4 days after the inauguration. You've got Mike Flynn in the middle of several things. Sally Yates has gone to Don McGahn to tell him that, you know, he could be co-opted easily. Don McGahn tells Donald Trump. Donald Trump basically, allegedly says, who cares? Those are Obama's people. Get them out of here. Mike Flynn has this sideshow with Turkey. There's all sorts of things going on here that this is a pretty explosive, despite the redactions, a pretty explosive.
You know, in a weird way, what's most explosive are all those black spaces that where you don't know.
Just one teaser line going into it.
Where the shark's going to surface next. But I think you're right, Mike, that Mueller is saying the fact that Flynn came in early accepted responsibility led other people to say, I need to talk to the special counsel too. And you can see he's been building this case for so many months, and how much stuff he must have about the whole range of Trump transition, Trump administration activities.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.